In the previous lesson, we talked about biblical creation accounts, focusing mainly on Genesis 1 specifically, and looking at the general ways in which we describe within Christianity the ways in which God created the universe across 7 days. In this lesson, what we're going to do is talk about the story of Adam and Eve and the importance of this story within Christian practices, talk about where it comes from, and then reference a couple of biblical quotations from this story, and then talk about the fall of Adam and Eve as well, and the importance in terms of Christian doctrine about the fall and its significance on the ways in which church fathers, since the creation of the Bible, people like Augustine, for example, have interpreted this story and the impact that it has on the idea of original sin as well. So, like I said, the last lesson we explored the nature of creation stories as stated in the book of Genesis, and in this lesson we're going to look at the role of humans within the biblical creation accounts. So the previous lesson was just about the general biblical creation accounts that existed. This one is going to be about the role of mankind, the role of man within this particular story, and the focus is, of course, Adam and Eve. So when we talk about the role of human beings within the biblical texts, and specifically the role of human beings within the creation stories, we have to first make clear that human beings have a very special place in the biblical creation accounts that exist. In terms of God's creation more generally, human beings have some kind of special status in that particular role. Firstly, they are created in the image of God, so this is one instance in which human beings are seen to have a special place in terms of what God sought out in terms of creation, and they are also created to have dominion over creation. So I mentioned in the last lesson that in the first creation account in Genesis 1, God creates humans last, on the last day, well, the day before he rests. And this is a significance because it signifies the fact that God has created humanity to have dominion over the rest of creation, over the rest of animal and plant life, for example. So that is how we interpret the role of human beings within Genesis 1 as a biblical creation account. In Genesis 2, we see that God creates Adam and Eve in the place of the Garden of Eden. So beginning, of course, with Adam and places Adam within the Garden of Eden, we see this in Genesis 2. And then from the rib of Adam, we see that God creates Eve, who is Adam's companion. They are said to, in this creation account, they are said to have a, quote, perfect relationship with God. So it's important to note that we have, again, reference to the special place and the special status that human beings, specifically Adam and Eve in this instance, have in terms of their relationship with God. Adam and Eve are able to enjoy the Garden of Eden, and God created the Garden of Eden for them, again, signifying the importance of human beings and the special status that human beings have. God literally creates a Garden of Eden for them. And there was one rule that is predicted, that is stated by God within this particular paradise. This is that they must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is from Genesis 2, verse 17. Now, what's important about this is, it's not necessarily important. What's quite interesting as a misconception is, within all of these sort of traditional understandings of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's seen as an apple tree. But there's actually no reference to this idea of it being an apple tree in the Bible itself. This is just something that has come down through our interpretation and artistic renditions of this particular scene in the Bible. Just thought I'd throw out that nice little interesting bit for you there. Now, since they had been given free will, Adam and Eve in this particular instance, to do what they wanted, what this prescription is essentially a test by God. They are being told that you have the rights and the freedom to do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want within this garden. You have only one rule: do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You then have free will to do whatever you want, and essentially this means that they are being tested in terms of this tree of knowledge existing within the Garden of Eden. Now, the test itself would come from a crafty serpent, if we're going to focus on the biblical, the creation account itself. And we move from Genesis 2 to Genesis 3, when we see that in Genesis 3, the serpent will come to question God's command and suggests to Adam and Eve that God wants to prevent them from gaining the same knowledge as he had. Now, the serpent in question would actually tempt Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and it would be Adam that would then go along with it as well. So Adam and Eve were able to enjoy the Garden of Eden that God had created for them. Oh, sorry, this is the same slide. There we go. So Eve was essentially tempted by the fruit from the forbidden tree and went about eating it, and they were tempted by the serpent, of course. And she shared some of the fruit with Adam, and they both had therefore disobeyed God in this particular regard. This one single command that they had. They had sinned, and in fact, this was known as, in terms of modern Christian doctrine as we understand it today, this was seen to be original sin, because this was the first sin that had happened, and it is the first time sin had entered into the world because of the actions and the free will of Adam and Eve. And from this, we go from the committing of this sin, committing of the disobeying of God, to the fall of Adam and Eve. The fall is a term that we use to describe this end of the perfect relationship with God, the fall from this perfect relationship. Adam and Eve fell out of this perfect relationship with God because of their disobedience, and they had broken the trust of God by eating from the from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And today, what we believe in terms of Christian thought is that Christians would argue that the fall had a detrimental impact not just on Adam and Eve specifically, but on all of humanity. It represented a fall not just in terms of the perfect relationship with God and Adam and Eve, but also a fall in terms of the perfect relationship between God and mankind. According to a lot of different Christian denominations today, all children born into the world are born with this idea of original sin that was first introduced by Adam and Eve. This is a Augustinian doctrine. This is an idea that is presented by St. Augustine. The idea that we have original sin, and the idea that this original sin comes from the fall of Adam and Eve is a church doctrine that has been passed down by numbers of different theologians since the introduction of the Bible. So this is essentially how we talk about the role of human beings within the biblical creation accounts. In the next lesson, we're going to continue to talk about other aspects of Christian theological doctrine.